Good morning, everybody. I'm Professor Jimenez, and amongst my duties here at FIT, I teach a course on international corporate responsibility, and I'm also the faculty advisor to the student club on corporate social responsibility. Ola Stepnik, my president, and Kristen Hjelti, vice president, are here as well. And because of our strong interest not only in our major and our club, but all of FIT in ethical fashion and eco-fashion, we're very happy to have Kate Black here to present. Kate Black is the founder and editor-in-chief of Magnifico, a digital source for eco-fashion and sustainable living. She's the founder of Eco Sessions, a global platform that brings together designers, industry, and consumers. She's regularly featured on the Huffington Post. And she has recently published a book that she's going to be talking about today, Magnifico, Your Head-to-Toe Guide to Ethical Fashion and Non-Toxic Beauty. And I was lucky enough to look at an advance copy, and I have to say it's a very, very helpful resource for all of us here that are interested in eco-fashion, because I think one thing that people are hungry for is some kind of a precise guidance, you know? And so, you know, people have questions like organic cotton, is it, you know, how does that stack up against like Tencel, you know? And, you know, what about beauty products? What about jewelry? You know, there's so many different aspects. And so the beauty of this book is it leads us sector by sector and analyzes the environmental and social impact of the products that are offered. And at the end, one thing that's good for students writing papers and looking for jobs is there's helpful tips, which lists a lot of interesting companies. It gives you little profiles on interesting companies in all these different fields. So with that, you know, I think I'm eager to learn as well. Kate, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. Can you hear me okay in the back? Okay, good. So we're here for a while, so I thought what I would do is I would talk about the book for a little while, and then Professor Jimenez and I are going to have a little chat. He's going to ask me some more questions relevant to your programs, and then, of course, we can do a Q&A. But before we do all that, it should help maybe if I tell you just a little bit about myself. So I'm not from here. I was raised in Canada. I grew up there. I graduated from the University of Toronto, and I started my career in digital publishing and online marketing. And I worked for Canada's largest newspaper, which is the Toronto Star, for over 10 years. And then I transitioned to a digital agency and really helped clients craft their digital stories. And then I fell in love with a musician and got the chance to move to Europe. So I moved to the Netherlands, then I moved to Germany, then I moved to Switzerland. And all the while, I could continue to work because I speak a few languages and my skills were transferable. But in 2007, we had the chance to move to Tokyo, and we did, but I didn't have any opportunity to work. I don't speak Japanese, and my marketing skills just weren't transferable. So for the first time in my life, it was time to kind of sit back and evaluate and try to decide what I was going to do, especially if Japan was going to be in my future for an unlimited amount of time. So I started to craft this idea about what I was really good at and what I was really passionate about. So I have a background in internet, basically. I'm in love with the internet, and I'm also very environmentally conscious. I've been a vegetarian for over 25 years, and I started to look about what the world needed. And this was a time when Vanity Fair had a green issue, Vogue was going to have a green issue the next year, and I thought, aha, this is it. Love fashion. I love, you know, all the things that designers are trying to do to make fashion better. Maybe I'll start a blog. So in 2008, I launched Magnifico.com as a daily eco-fashion find. So every day I would feature some designer or some product around the world who was doing something different or something better. And in the beginning, it was really hard. You know, the end of the day would come at 10:30, 11, 11:30, and I still didn't have something to post because I was very kind of, I had two criteria. It had to be really aesthetically pleasing. It had to look like every other kind of design, and it had to ship internationally. because I thought about people like me around the world. If they fell in love with a designer and they wanted to actually support that designer, they needed to be able to transact online and put their dollars towards supporting that product. So the blog went on for several years. At its height, it was read in 120 countries. We had 26 contributors from 9 different countries. And in the end, it was really easy. We had an editorial calendar that was outlaid 2 months in advance. We knew exactly what products we were going to feature and which designers. But then Japan suffered a kind of trifecta of disasters in 2011. There was the earthquake, the tsunami, and the nuclear disaster. And so it was time for me to leave Japan. So I moved to the US, and I'm not sure if you know that Canadians have a little trouble moving to the US. So I was given permission to live but not to work. And so the lawyers, my green card lawyers, took one look at the site and they were like, shut it down. So I had to kind of figure out a way to keep active. Now I was in a country where I speak the language. I was in a community of thriving people who are working in this industry, and I wanted to keep my momentum going. So I launched Eco Sessions in 2012 as a free event platform where designers and industry could come and tell their stories kind of in the Magnifico fashion, but we would do it in a format like this. There would be a panel, and then consumers or young designers or anybody would join the audience, and we would just do this kind of interactive storytelling. And right from the beginning, I remember the very first one we had was in Boston, and it was on sustainable textiles. And we had 2 designers, one in interiors and one in fashion, who work exclusively in natural dyes. And they were telling their entrepreneurial stories, like how difficult it is to match dye lots, how hard it is to kind of get consumers to recognize that on-trend colors are not necessarily available in natural dyes, and how they kind of compensated for that. And we were going along quite nicely, and we get to the Q&A portion, and the very first question that comes up is somebody stands up and they say, so let me just understand this correctly. Are you trying to say that conventional dyes are bad? And it was the first of many aha moments. Every time we had Eco Sessions, there were always questions where I thought, I didn't quite understand why consumers didn't know these things. I didn't understand why they didn't recognize already, because I had been in the industry and I'd been writing about these issues for over 4 or 5 years, and I thought everybody came along with me. So last year, I was given the chance to write a book. And I thought, okay, this is it. I'm going to write everything that I think consumers should know about every product that they buy. And I couldn't talk about clothing and the chemicals in clothing without talking about personal care products and body lotion and things we put on our skin. And then I couldn't talk about that without talking about underwear or shoes. And so it's a head-to-toe guide, and it covers every single thing that I think that we should know or that consumers should know. And it starts from this place of kind of chemicals. So in 2000, the CDC started what's called body burden studies. So they were interested to see what kind of chemicals we're having in the environment, chemicals like PCBs, whether or not they're persistent, which means that they stay. PCB is a good example. PCBs have been banned since 1970s, and they're still being shown or found in the breast milk of mothers. So 30 years after they're banned, they're still around. So which ones are persistent? And then which chemicals are bioaccumulative, which means that every little bit that we get kind of adds to our limit. So this study, I cite in the book, happened in 2004. An environmental NGO here in the US partnered with the Red Cross, and they took blood samples from the umbilical cords of babies. And what they discovered is there were over 287 chemicals, and 180 of them known to cause cancer to either humans or animals. Day 1 of birth. So a lot of this kind of resonates for me throughout the book, because I think we can't really talk about the things that we buy and the things that we're putting next to our skin without thinking about body burden. So it starts with our personal care products. They think on average that women use about 12 products, 168 different chemicals, men about half. So if you think about it, that's your shampoo, your conditioner, your body soap, your body lotion, your toothpaste, your deodorant, your face lotion, and I haven't even gotten to makeup and hair. Right, so there's a lot of products that we're using and a lot of things that we're kind of not even thinking about. And then we get dressed. And so then it's all the things that we're putting on when we get dressed. And so I wanted to kind of write a book that helped consumers understand that as we get more conscious about what we're eating, and as we start to pay attention to how food affects our health, that we can also have this kind of relationship with our personal products. And I think we get it a little bit with beauty care products and personal products. Like I think when we go to the store, we see things that are paraben-free, and we're like, oh, okay, I'm not sure what that is, but I'm sure it's good for me, right? But I don't think we recognize that from the moment we're born, we're wrapped in textiles. We sleep in them, we put them around us as soon as we get out of the shower, and then we get dressed. And a lot of people just don't even know what they're made of and where they come from. So a large portion of my book talks about materials, because I think that you're all in fashion, so you gotta have some sense of materials, but I think the average customer and consumer really just doesn't understand what materials are, and that there's such a thing as good, better, and best. So Green America is an overarching body that looks after all kinds of greenie businesses, and this fall they dedicated an issue to fashion, about detoxing your closet. And they excerpt 4 pages from my book all about materials, because there is a difference between making a choice of, say, a nylon, which the production of nylon takes more CO2, causes more CO2 emissions than any other textile, than the difference between cotton or organic cotton. And so there's environmental effects, there's social effects, but there are also health benefits to different qualities and different fibers that we put next to our skin. And anybody with skin sensitivity or eczema already knows this, but a lot of us just don't. And a lot of us don't know that our choices in materials and what we're supporting designers making are having implications to communities that are creating those fibers, as well as environmental impacts. The other thing that I think is really important is that consumers need to understand that supply chains are a little murky. I mean, I think we saw that with Rana Plaza. When Rana Plaza collapsed and a whole bunch of brands just kind of immediately stepped back and said, no, we weren't there, we weren't producing there, even though there were tags found in the rubble for their brands. And so they kind of started to come clean with the fact that supply chains are a little murky and kind of out of their control. But it wasn't the first time that this information has been public. In 2009, Greenpeace conducted a study, and they saw 2 rivers in China, the Yangtze and the Pearl, which are in 2 major manufacturing zones, running what's called the color of the season. You might have heard that. So the dyes of whatever was being manufactured were being released into these watersheds. And so Greenpeace, curious about animal health as well as everybody who lived along the waterbeds, decided to take some samples. So they took some samples of the water, and they found not only just dyes, but also hazardous and restricted chemicals. So we have this kind of chain of chemicals that in North America and Western cultures, we restrict far more than we do in developing countries. So here were restricted chemicals that actually had been banned in all countries. And so Greenpeace thought, oh, well, this is really interesting. So they took the manifest of every company that was manufacturing in the zone, and they went and said, hey, brands like Adidas, H&M, Burberry, and said, your factories are using restricted chemicals. Are they on your clothes? And every single brand denied. So not to be deterred, the next year Greenpeace went out and bought those clothes from those brands across 14 different countries. And guess what? Residue still on the clothes. At retail, they knew exactly who was using those chemicals. And so it's the very first time that I think 2 things happened. Consumers realized that your safety is up to you, right? And brands realize that even though they think that they understand supply chains, that the supply chains are just totally murky. And so as you move forward in your careers, I suggest that you kind of recognize that if you work for a big company, that this is going to be one of the challenges for a big company and for you if you're interested in these matters. So you're going to have to be open to having a dialogue about what it's like to be a multinational company and producing in fashion touches almost every country in the planet. So what does that look like, and how are brands taking care of that? The other issue is about provenance. I think after Rana Plaza, there was a lot of call to do kind of boycott Bangladesh. And so a lot of my book talks about really thinking about provenance in another way and trying to understand what that has to do with what we're buying as consumers. So this is a picture of a leather producing zone in a neighborhood in Bangladesh called Hazarabad. It caught my attention, of course, because in 2013, another environmental group listed it as one of the top 10 most toxic places on the planet, more toxic than Chernobyl or Fukushima. So I was like, what? So, and in this zone, there's about 185,000 people who live within the region. It's about 20 acres, about the size of 20 football fields, and 12,000 men and women work within the tanneries. And the tanneries don't provide any protection. So it's really kind of old school production. and all the effluent just goes into the river. So they reckon of the 12,000 that work there, 95% of them probably won't live past the age of 50. And there's no reason for this to exist. The Bangladesh government has been alerted to this zone and to this toxic mess, and they have set aside land. They built an effluent treatment center. This is a center that's going to take all the water that comes out of the process, clean it all up, and repurpose it. So there's an effluent treatment center waiting. All that has to happen is this region needs to close down and move down the road. And they've been slated to do that since 2004. And every year they push off, and they push off, and they push off. And nobody seems to know why, except that this is a $1 billion trade zone. So everybody seems to think that maybe just no businesses want to close and risk losing that money. And consumers don't know that they're part of this problem. So all the leather that comes from this region gets bought up. Mostly the biggest buyers are Japan, the US, and Europe. That leather goes to those countries. As soon as somebody puts their hand on it and starts to produce it, that becomes a made in Italy garment or a made in Japan garment, and you never know that you were complicit in this kind of production. So I think in my book, I want consumers to think about that. I want them to think about, okay, what's it made of? Who made it? And do I trust that they understand their supply chain? And where does it come from? And a lot of that onus is on the designers, but a lot of that also comes on consumers. Because not only are you making what choices to buy, but then as soon as you take the product home, you're also complicit in another whole environmental impact. So when we're talking about garments, they think that 2/3 of the carbon footprint of a garment happens when you take the garment home. This is in your washing, your dry cleaning, your drying, and then if you're not disposing properly, for example, if you're throwing it in a landfill, and there's something like 86 billion pieces going to landfill every single year, we're causing another kind of form of harm after we buy it. So I want everybody in the fashion industry to think about, could you make products better? Could you make products with end of life in mind? And then I want consumers to think, well, do I have to wash it all the time? Do I need to buy something that needs to be dry cleaned? Could I not buy something that's dark in color and maybe doesn't need so much cleaning? So those were all kind of the shadowy, dark stuff that I thought that people should know. But then I also wanted to kind of communicate the optimism that I always had in Magnifico. I wanted to highlight brands that are doing amazing things, and I really wanted to kind of shine the light on the options. But it felt a little disingenuous to suggest in a buying guide that we could buy our way out of the problem. And that's partly because our rate of consumption is part of the issue. We're at a rate now, I think, with fast fashion brands and multinationals, they're producing 90 billion garments per year. And that's mostly from virgin materials. So that's about 11 garments per person for every person on the planet. And we know in North America, we buy probably more than 11 garments. So we're kind of complicit in this overall arcing consumption. So I wanted to come up with an idea that took into consideration the work that good brands were doing and took into consideration our consumption as part of the problem. So I came up with this acronym called VALUE. And it stems from this idea that I think one of the reasons why fast fashion brands and those 90 billion garments are so kind of pervasive is because everybody is looking for something that's inexpensive. We actually are just really craving items of value. But the problem is when you buy something that's inexpensive or low cost, you're also getting low quality, you're getting low transparency, you're really kind of participating in a system that I don't think you necessarily want to participate. So if we could rethink that value in another way, what would it look like? So the very first letter is vintage, and this is because I want people to just stop and think, do I really need to buy it? And does it need to be new? Right? There's so many times where we're just like, oh, I need a blah, blah, blah dress for the wedding. Well, hey, guess what? You can rent dresses now, right? Like, so there's a lot of just different options where you don't necessarily need to buy it and it doesn't need to be new. My mother has this, I talk about this all the time. She has a cashmere coat in her closet that I covet. I love it. She never wears it. And every single year I'm like, Mom, just give me the coat. Right? Like, why do I need to go and buy a new coat when you have this beautiful coat sitting in the closet? So if we could just kind of release some of the clothing that's already existing. Does your dad have something that you want and he never wears it? Like, so could we just loosen up some of what's already there and put it back into circulation? And then with the money that we saved, right, could we not next time maybe buy something that has a little bit more effect in another community? So could we buy something artisan? So the UN, the Smithsonian, and a bunch of NGOs are really kind of working on this idea of endangered craft, because there are communities like hand beaters, Kenyan beaters, and Javanese batik workers. And there's like pockets of communities that have been living off their craft for generations. But now that we're in the land of mass production and mass machination, those communities are really suffering. So could you not buy something that supported a community, or supported, a women's group, or supported some sort of livelihood in a community in a developing country? And to that effect, could you not support somebody in your own backyard? Could you not buy local and support a local emerging designer? Or buy something from Etsy, or buy something from a local market, or kind of support a local maker? Could you buy something that was upcycled? So a lot of what we have in the world is kind of on its way downstream and headed toward landfill and trash. And there's a lot of really amazing design thinkers and design strategists who are figuring out how to do and take those materials and put them back into use. So Freitag is a bag company that's been around for almost 20 years in Switzerland. They make amazing messenger bags and backpacks and everything out of truck tarps. There's a whole heap of companies that are taking what we would look at and be like, oh, that's garbage, and actually recrafting it and retooling it for sale. And then the last one is kind of the catch-all. And I put it at the end for a couple of reasons. I think that we're all a little leery and weary of words like green and natural and sustainable and eco-friendly and environmentally friendly, and they kind of just don't have any meaning anymore. And so what I want people to do is take that back. I want something that really resonates with you. So this could be either environmental rights, human rights, or animal rights. And I think if we had a dinner party and we sat down and we just kind of debated what's more important, the people, the planet, the animals, we would probably disagree. And that's okay, because I think that if you're going to buy something that has an ethical element, it should be your own values, right? There's vegan designers, there's fair trade options now in fashion, and there's really great companies working on environmentally friendly products and materials. So I think when we're looking at the E, it should be something that resonates personally with you. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So from a design perspective, and I'm going to talk to you all like you're designers now, because you're all in fashion and you're going to go out and change the world, I'm sure of it. So Krista Knit is an LA-based brand, and so she uses only what's called mill ends and dead stock. So when it comes to vintage, none of her materials are new. So what dead stock is, say for example, Prada needs a particular fabric and they only want 500 yards, but the mill has a minimum run of 1,000. So they run the 1,000, they cut off the 500, they give it to Prada, and then the other 500 sits in the corner of the mill until somebody comes along and buys it. And so there's designers out there that are basing collections around the leftover material. And so as designers, and as you move off into your fashion careers, could you work for companies, or could you get companies to think about, well, do we have to produce the material from scratch? Could we not already find some existing material? When it comes to artisan, this happens on almost every layer, but the UN is working with really high-end designers. So this is Stella Jean. She's an Haitian-Italian designer who shows at Milan Fashion Week. And every single season, she incorporates something that the UN and the Ethical Fashion Initiative have cobbled together to put into her designs. So these pants are from a textile woven in Burkina Faso in a creative community. And so it's taking creative community artisan work and putting it right into runway. Another example is Osei Duro. It's a Canadian-American hybrid company that does all their production in Ghana. They love this Ghanaian batik. They thought, you know what, if we're going to start a fashion company, let's start a fashion company where it has meaning for us and can create jobs. And so they're working with Heritage Textiles, and they're trying to reinvigorate Heritage Textiles in Ghana. Michelle Obama likes it. It's very affordable, and it's trying to make a commitment. Our local designers, here's a good example. She's on the cover of my book, Study New York. She's been here for almost 10 years. She's one of the very first brands that was fully transparent. So she lists on her website everything that she uses, what the garment's made of, where she sourced it, why she chose it. So if she has to choose a synthetic thread from China, for example, she'll say why she had to choose that synthetic thread. most of the times with local designers, not everything is available in the US, right? We don't have any zipper makers anymore. Like it's hard to be a holistically local designer. But I think if you kind of peel that back a little bit, she's creating jobs here, she's doing design here, she's trying to source as much as she can from here. So she gets my tag for local. And Loopworks is this example of upcycled. So how many of you have heard of Southwest Airlines? Right, so they were trying to be lush and luxe and affordable at the same time. So when they launched, all the seats were leather. And so they weren't making any money. They called in the consultants. They said, oh my gosh, we're not making any money. The consultant said, well, you have two choices. You can either raise the ticket prices or you can get rid of the leather. Because it turns out leather weighs a lot and was costing them heaps in airline fuel. So they stripped out all the leather, 80,000 seats worth. And then what do you do with 80,000 seats worth of leather? Well, you call a design company who only works with materials that are existing. So Loopworks is a Seattle-based design firm. And so they came together, they worked with this material, and they came up with a really crafty idea to make a set of bags and traveler themed articles. So there's weekenders and laptop bags. And because of this kind of strategy, they got mainstream press everywhere. Fortune magazine, Wall Street Journal, not to mention a few other magazines. So it's putting the kind of design thinking with what's existing. Love is Mighty is another designer. She's based here in New York. She's a shoe designer, and she's originally from North India. And each time she was going back, she realized that the women in the communities around her home were underemployed. They had beautiful handwork, they had beautiful weaving technology or weaving capabilities, but they just weren't working and as profitable as they had been in previous generations. So she started to incorporate some of their work into a line, but then she thought maybe we could do something else. And she realized that trash is so abundant in India, especially where she lived. So she started to work with the women in the community, and they started to rip up chip wrappers and candy wrappers and all these things to make this unique woven textile. So that silver that you see in the shoes is actually the aluminum from the inside of a chip wrapper with a little bit of color from the branding or from something on the outside, but not so that it's identifiable as, oh, those are Oreo shoes, right? Like, so trying to make it environmentally friendly, upcycled, artisan supported. She's a vegan, so these are vegan shoes. Like, so she ticks off a whole bunch of boxes. And then back to this ethical. So if you think about what resonates most with you, so Patagonia is well known for being an environmentally friendly company. They're really at the forefront of trying to use environmentally friendly materials. Yes. And then Eileen Fisher is also, she's a conventional brand. She's started here in New York. And her plan now is to be fully sustainable by 2020. And she has a unique way to think about that. So, in most companies, CSR sits aside from product, which sits aside from design. And so in Eileen Fisher now, they're making pods where there's a product person, a design person, as well as a human rights person. So when they work in developing countries, they have a human rights person right in the team so that they can really try and think about these issues and what happens to workers when you're trying to bring Western ideals and Western production to artisan communities. And then Brave Gentleman is also a New York-based vegan designer, and everything he makes, luxe suits, shoes, briefcases, everything is vegan. So it's mock tweed, it's mock leather, it's a whole bunch of materials that are meant to give men kind of this prestige look without using any animal products whatsoever. So I'm here today because I think that you have the opportunity to change the world. It's the third largest industry, fashion, right? It's the second in terms of intensity of trade, but it's also second in terms of pollution. So we have a long way to go, but we certainly have the brightest minds, I think, the brightest talents to make change. And it's possible. Every brand that I list in my book makes it so that we can change this story. You can use personal care products without any nasty synthetics in them. You can wear clothes that use good dyeing or good finishings, Blue Sign. There's a whole bunch of certifications that we can follow and create and produce clothes that aren't harmful to the workers who make them, to the environment and where they're made, and to the consumer who ends up wearing them. And mainstream media is starting to get it. I don't think we're going to have a Vogue green issue again. And that's simply just because they reckon that ethical fashion is only about 1% of market right now, so we're just not at the stage where Anna Wintour is going to dedicate an entire issue, but she does dedicate a page every issue to some social enterprising designer or ethical designer, and so does Mary Claire, and we're starting to see it more and more often. The CFDA Vogue Fashion Fund just had 3 winners. One of them is an ethical, absolutely ethical, sustainable designer. So we're starting to see it more and more in mainstream. And then you have people like me who are going to keep writing exposés about the industry and about brands that are really need to clean up their act. So you can find me on social media because I love the internet. And I think Professor Jimenez and I are going to have a Q&A conversation, and then they're going to bring some books up if you want to buy some books.
Okay, so I want to encourage students to ask questions because I think there's so much great material that was presented. Like one of the first ones that I had as you were going through was the certifications, because one certification that I've been having my students learn about is Blue Sign, because the Eileen Fisher especially, but Patagonia too, they're pushing Blue Sign very heavily. And when I go, and so we go and we investigate the actual Blue Sign manuals and stuff like that. And Blue Sign, essentially, as I understand it, certifies that it's like they review your procedures so that you have no allegedly toxic inputs. But they don't actually test the clothing. And that kind of concerns me, because what I think we learned from Rana Plaza is that the inspection system doesn't work. And so, but I understand that there's another one, which is Ecotex or Okotex, and they actually do test the fiber. So do you think that's a better certification than Blue Sign?
Yeah, I didn't. If I had to pick a favorite, I definitely think Okotex is one of my favorite. I think testing. I think in trying to find some certification, and anybody who's in business, like you're gonna get into like your knees of brands and the evaluation and trying to decide which auditors and which kind of testing situations. Is this not working?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
Excuse me.
And which kind of certifications are going to work for the company and for the overarching ethos of the brand. A lot of it has to do with price. A lot of it has to do with availability. A lot of it just kind of has to do with ethos. What's I think the issue with Okotex. So Okotex will test a garment and every single element of the garment, the thread, the tag, everything that's part of it. So they'll test it for a whole bunch of restricted, known, and unknown chemicals. And so when you're dealing with baby clothes, when you're dealing with sheeting, when you're dealing with anything for people with sensitivities, this is kind of the highest level, and this is what I highly recommend. But it's really popular in Europe, and it's not so popular in North America yet. So I think logistically that there's still some business hurdles that we need to recognize that it's difficult for some companies to get there. But definitely I think a certification is better than none. And Okotex is my favorite.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that, because I've been noticing it on my shirts, on men's shirts now. I think Philips Van Heusen, we have some people in CSR at Philips Van Heusen. I guess they're doing a good job because they all seem to have the Okotex tag now. But do you think perhaps it's not so visible in part out of marketing reasons? Do you think large brands like Philips Van Heusen might prefer not to put forward their green credentials out of fear that they'll seem too granola?
No. I don't think. I really, and even now, ethical fashion bloggers will pop up once in a while and they'll be like, we're not the granola. Like, I think we're so far beyond. Like, fashion is fashion, and now we just have good fashion and then we have bad fashion. Like, I think we're kind of past the stage where you can identify somebody who's in ethical fashion wear from a mile away. Like, you just really can't tell. I think there's a bigger issue, and I think that this has to do culturally. Like, I think that North Americans, when I lived in Germany absolutely, you see Okotex all the time. You can see GOTS certified. Like, consumers know what that means and they understand what that means, and they'll look for it, especially if they're buying baby clothes. And so I think in North America, we just kind of, we don't have that expectation. We don't know that that's an option, that we can actually just kind of expect that if we're going to buy something, that it should also be certified for safety. And to that end, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition is they're testing now, Sustainable Apparel Coalition. It's an overarching body. It's kind of a working group of big brands, Nike. Who else is in the list? I have to check my book. But it's all the big brands, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to now share as much data as they can without being kind of competitively disadvantaged. So they're trying to say, like, we know that we have really good certifications and factories in this zone, but perhaps this country and this zone needs work, and they're trying to do as best they can to share that information. And so they've launched together collectively a hand tag, based on their environmental records, and they're testing it in Europe. So they're not testing it in the American market, because I don't think Americans would know what to do with that kind of hand tag. Americans or Canadians, I just don't think that we have it in our psyche to kind of look to see what it's made of, look to see where it's made, and then also look for some sort of safety certification. We're not at that stage.
Right. I mean, I guess it's a marketing decision to be made company by company. I mean, at the CSR Club, we were struck last year when we had the founder of this company, this Brooklyn company, Borum Apparel, that is menswear. It's a lot of knits that have been very carefully sourced in New Zealand, and an entire supply chain traced. And the founder, Teal, I forget what his last name is, but he said that he was very, very cautious about putting any association with sustainability into his brand DNA, because he thought it was risky, that it would turn people off, and that he had to insist on the quality and the look, and that let people discover later that he had that commitment. So I guess, I mean, the question it raises in my mind, though, is what about the big companies that are putting themselves forward? Can we trust them? Like, I think the immediate example that leaps to my mind is the H&M's Conscious Collection, because it's, it seems very well marketed. If you read the literature, it's all hyper professional. But do you believe it? Because H&M is also a company which has been heavily attacked and implicated in all kinds of problems in Bangladesh. So, like, what would you make of H&M's claims to have found the religion?
Well, there's a couple things wrapped up in that. So in my book, I talk about greening through the back door. And greening through the back door is just kind of the business imperative of companies to do something. Like, we're now at a natural resource kind of crisis, and companies know that there's not enough water. Everything is made, the latest fabric that every kind of fast fashion brand loves is rayon, but rayon is causing deforestation both in Canada's aurora boreal forest as well as Indonesian rainforest. So we're kind of at a crunch of natural resources, and it's just good business to figure that out. So does that make a good company, the fact that they're trying to figure out their business advantage? I think it's up to you to decide. So I think for every company that we can say something bad about, they're probably all working on something because it's a business imperative. I think the Conscious Collection is interesting because it does get consumers to really think about that. The thing I like the best about H&M is the fact that they're one of the biggest. There's 10 big buyers of organic cotton. Organic cotton right now is only at 1% of all cotton production. So we have a long way to go to make cotton a good fiber for the planet and for the people who wear it. And one of the issues is that the yields of organic cotton are not as high as they are with conventional GMO'd and pesticide-used cotton. But the top 10 brands, of which H&M, Zara, Nike, Decathlon, CNA are, they guarantee the price before the farmer goes to plant. And don't forget, like, a large portion of the cotton is planted by a single smallholder farmer. right? Who's just trying to, it's a on the road of development. They grow food for their family, and then a development worker comes to their country and says, you should try and also grow a cash crop. And cotton is a really good, yeah. Sorry about that. And cotton is a really good cash crop, and so it's a really good path to kind of sort of prosperity and having enough money to go to the doctor and having enough money to send your child to education. So we're talking about a really small development stream. And so the fact that H&M provides this kind of, and they have the money to do it, to guarantee the price of cotton up front, means that if you need really cheap underwear, organic cotton underwear, it's a good place to go. So I think that every brand kind of has something that they're working on, but I think if you wanted to be a truly ethical shopper, you would probably shop a little bit, like there's a reason why the E is at the end of my value acronym, because I think it's kind of the last thing you should be looking for. I think if you're going to spend your money and your hard-earned money to buy something that gives you some sort of feeling or something that you covet or going to last for a lifetime, that you want it to also be something that gave back to somebody, the maker or the artisan group or something.
Okay. Well, and please feel free to interrupt with your own questions. One thing that I find very intellectually challenging is trying to rate fabrics against each other on sustainability, because it almost depends on the criteria that you choose, and there is no absolute fixed standard. So, cotton is often attacked for pesticide use and for water use. So, do you have a favorite fabric? Like, would you compare, for example, Tencel with organic cotton?
Okay, so back to greening through the back door. So 3 years ago, 2011, Nike created an amazing app called the Making app, and they were also really interested in this question. And it's not just based on based on life cycle assessments. So they had all of their designers do life cycle assessments on different materials, different blends, for a couple of reasons. Number one, they had designers who were asking internally, well, what's better for the environment if I use X or if I use Y? And secondly, because they're really interested in having the whole industry use better environmentally friendly fibers. It'll drop the prices down. It's a business decision. But they took it to the London School of Fashion in 2012, 2013, and had designers kind of test drive it. So there's empirical evidence about which one is the best fiber from a life cycle assessment standpoint. I think it depends on the region. And I mentioned this in my book, like to talk about cotton and its use of water and pesticides is a really regional discussion. There's something called the sustainable, it's called the Better Cotton Initiative, and they work with a group called Cotton Made in Africa, so it's CMIA, and it's not organic, but it mostly runs off of rain-fed grown cotton. So it is a sustainable cotton, and it is kind of to be grown in that region. So I wouldn't pin that as better than an organic cotton. I think that there's just different kind of ways to think about cotton. I'm a huge fan of Tencel. I love it because the technology that went into it is so intense. So Tencel is made out of beech or eucalyptus trees, and it's the technology was developed by Lenzing, which is a German company. And they're able to break down the trees into a wearable fiber that kind of feels a little bit like rayon or silk. It has kind of wicking material, a little bit antimicrobial, and they're able to save 99.6% of the chemicals right in-house. So they have it all kind of sorted out and can produce in a closed loop cycle. And so I think that that's amazing. Tencel also happens to be one of the Eileen Fisher's most used fabrics, and so she's also working on a pilot project with them to recycle. So we're going to see a lot of change in materials this year. There's a lot of innovation happening. I think this is actually the year of materials, and I think this will be the year that Tencel will actually be recyclable.
Great. Well, we keep coming back, it seems, over and over again to Eileen Fisher. We have some connections there. Our course on international corporate social responsibility was written by an FIT ITM graduate, Shona Quinn, who went from FIT to Yale and got a master's in industrial ecology and wrote her thesis on the fashion industry. and then came back, wrote that paper for us, done a lot of consulting. Now she's at Eileen Fisher. We're having a guest speaker from Eileen Fisher this Thursday. What's her name? Who are we? Okay, Rebecca McGee's coming on Thursday. And we haven't had as much luck with people from Patagonia, I think, because they're in California, so they probably don't drop by as often. But it makes me wonder if there's not guidance to be given in sort of like an A-list of companies that are doing well, which for me often just comes, it's over and over again. It's like Patagonia, Eileen Fisher, and then it seems like actually Nike is getting a certain amount of credibility because of the intensity of their effort. I don't know if you're smiling, so I guess you don't put them up there, but there's a website called Good Guide. We were talking about this and which tries to assign a numerical ranking to brands. Now, do you think that's possible? Because I feel like when you start talking Tencel and then this fabric and then the GOTS certification and the Okotex, there's so many factors that shoppers are looking first of all for the feel, the fit, the price. It gets so multifactorial that maybe an easy simplifier is the brand. Can we recommend certain brands, or is there a problem with that?
Well, no, I have a whole shopping guide in the book. I recommend a lot of brands. I think if I could read the subtext of what you're asking is for the easy solution, and if big, widespread, easily found brands are the solution. And I kind of caution a little bit against that, because I think that we've discovered, and we're at the questioning point where we really wonder whether capitalism is working for the planet and for all the people on the planet, and whether big business is in that critique, or whether we can actually support big business as also looking out for the planet and people. So I think that there's kind of a bigger question about what we expect from companies and brands. And so for that reason, and that's just one of the reasons, but I'm a really big proponent of small brands and small companies. I'm an entrepreneur myself. They have the ability to kind of pivot. They have the ability to move in a different direction. They have the ability to be a little bit more responsive to new technologies, new options. And so I think when you're looking for this thing, and fashion is kind of still about newness, why wouldn't you look for a new, smaller brand who was being kind of innovative from the beginning, like Borum Apparel? Like, why are we looking to the big brands to be cleaner? And I smirk with Nike because they still can't shake that sweatshop moniker, and they probably never will. And you can go on the web and see a bunch of sites dedicated to the working conditions. And that's something that affects a lot of big brands. And even Patagonia had to come clean last month and say that, as much as they were trying to be as transparent as possible, when you're a big brand, you can't always see down the line. So you really can't guarantee what you're offering. But when you're a small brand and you're buying directly from the supplier, you have a little bit more choice. So I think it depends what it is that we're really looking for, and how much effort we're going to put in to seeking that. So there's people who will go out of their way to go to a farmer's market or to go to, an organic market to buy things. And I think that kind of consumer is starting to exist for personal care products and for fashion.
Okay, great. I understand that you and Christine have a connection through fair trade. And so that's something that we talk a lot about in class, but we mostly have not yet gotten to fair trade in apparel, because it's one of the newer entrants into the fair trade spectrum. Mostly we deal with coffee. And so I'm curious, if you could briefly summarize what is the current state of fair trade apparel. That also I know is complicated by the fact that we have the U.S. The Fair Trade Association, which used to be Transfair, and we have the FLO and international standards. So what actually is fair trade in apparel?
So it's if it's a really exciting year for materials and innovation, it's also, I think, a really exciting time for fair trade. So there's a couple of one of the issues with fair trade certification is it's not as easy as coffee and bananas, because coffee and bananas have a single source, so we can certify the farm or the cooperative, and that's it. But fashion, as you know, takes up to between 7 and 10 steps from seed to shelf. So it's hard to certify it all the way from the gin to the cutting to the finishing to all of the processes. But the World Fair Trade Organization has been working on a pilot project with 10 brands, and 2 are through already. So Pachacuti, which is a UK brand, they make fair trade Panama hats, and so it's a little bit easier for them. But another example of kind of how challenging it is People Tree is also now certified fair trade. And People Tree has been really dedicated to this issue from their inception over 20 years ago. They're the first fashion brand to be soil certified. So Soil Association is an association in the UK for farmers. It's kind of like our equivalent of USDA. And so they really wanted to make sure that right off the beginning that all the fibers that they were using, all the cotton, was organic from seed. And so they've always been certified organic and fair trade cotton, and then they really wanted to kind of put that in the supply chain. I don't really see that happening given our conversation about long and convoluted supply chains. I don't really see that happening in big brands. Patagonia has something with Fair Trade USA, and it's a particular line, and it has to do with a particular production group. I think what's more common is we're going to see fair trade certified factories. So the very first footwear factory was certified in Ethiopia. It's a Canadian brand called Eau Liberté. And so they have the very first certified factory, and then they're going to work backwards. So then they're going to try and get their leather fair trade certified and then try and go that way. Pact, which is a really big brand out of California. You can find them at Whole Foods. They sell organic underwear and briefs and socks. And they also have a fair trade certified factory. So I think we're going to see more factories, but that doesn't tell you what happened before the final production, but I think it's a really good step. And back to Christine and I, so in New York, there's a coalition called the New York City Fair Trade Coalition, and it tries to support businesses who want to work under fair trade principles. So fair trade, in my limited time in this country, is a little fragmented in this country. I think you have 3 or 4 certifications in the US alone. And so the New York City Fair Trade Coalition tries to create an umbrella where you don't necessarily need to be certified, or you could be working in any one of the different certifications, but we come together as a group to kind of support each other entrepreneurial. So we have members who are food, members who are fashion, members who are other things. And so the fair trade community is working on something called Fair Tuesday. It's an activist momentum project, and it goes against Black Friday and Cyber Monday. So it's the first Tuesday after Thanksgiving, and they're always trying to get people, this will be the 3rd year, to get people to really think about if they want to do something, a fair trade purchase for a holiday, and to think about purchases that matter. So we're having a sale. Christine can post the date or the location, or you can go to their Facebook page, NYCFTC. We're having a sale on December 1st, which is Fair Tuesday, really close to here. So if you're a fair trade brand, or you know a fair trade brand, talk to Christine. And I think we saw a question in the back. Did you have a question? Okay, hold on. We have a microphone. Oh, did you have a question? You do? Great. Thank you.
So thank you. I just wanted to ask you about the picture that you have of the world if this succeeds. So what I'm asking specifically is there's a movement towards small business. I'm personally a very big proponent of small businesses. But what happens if we succeed? What happens to the world? Does everything become more expensive? Can small businesses support all the populations in the lesser developed countries? What's the picture that you see going forward?
Oh, that's a really tough question.
That's Henry Welt. He's a professor who's known for his deep philosophical questions.
Hi, Henry. Nice to meet you. So I do not in my book, I don't really name shame. I don't really bash big brands. I don't necessarily write about them and give them kind of the pages, like the paragraphs in my book to support them, because they have marketing budgets, and so big brands can support themselves. I think this road to development is really important. So I think the fact that we're doing production in developing countries is kind of part of an overarching prosperity movement that I support to a certain extent. I wish that we had a little bit more control. I wish the ILO, which is the International Labor Organization, also could have a little bit more control. So we move production to countries that have cheap labor, and that's kind of the way that we do business. But the ILO, which is supposed to help countries get organized for labor, doesn't necessarily have the teeth that it should have. So my E in ethical is really about people, so I wish that we could all live together. I think that with 7 billion people, there's enough kind of differences and group income levels to kind of support all different kinds of businesses. So I don't think necessarily that big business needs to move in and push all the mom and pop shops out. I think we can have big business and mom and pop shops and Etsy and small workers in their kitchen. Like, I think we can, with 7 billion people, I think we can support all of that. What do you think?
We agree.
I really don't know. It was an honest question. I don't know where it's going, but I do notice that most of the movement towards smaller entrepreneurial businesses, particularly if you're talking about ethical businesses, somehow produces goods at higher prices. So if you go to Whole Foods, for example, the average cost there is significantly higher than a competing non-organic supermarket. If you go to a farmer's market, I support a farmer's market in my local area, but the stuff that's there is more expensive than what's in the stores. So it's a question in my mind. I mean, this is great if you market it to affluent people, to upscale shoppers, but what happens to the average person who needs to furnish their living room or put clothing on their kids and is making $40,000 a year or $50,000 a year in the United States? Can they afford? Are there examples of these ethical companies that market to that crowd?
Well, and this is kind of, I think this is part of a bigger question and really an interesting kind of conversation, because so I think that a couple of things. I think that number one, one of the reasons why V is first in my value statement is because I don't think we always have to buy new. And that's not to say that if you are, a family with a working family that you don't deserve new. I think this is not a value judgment about that. But I think that what we're getting away from is that we're not recognizing that a $5.99 t-shirt from a fast fashion brand is not value. That t-shirt, it might be affordable now, but it's not affordable in 3 months when your kid still needs to go to school and it has 3 holes in it. Right, so I'm trying to get people to go back to like understanding that maybe a $30 T-shirt is not it's not conceivable up front, but it's a better purchase. So if we could figure out a way to budget like we used to, and if we could only buy one $30 T-shirt that's probably going to last the kid the whole season, as opposed to 3 $5.99 T-shirts that are probably only going to last 1 or 2 washes, that we're getting better value. So I think we're at a stage. I think that it's been marketed. Ethical fashion is marketed to a higher affluent group, and there's research to show that. GlobeScan is talking about the aspirationals and the kind of millennials who go out of their way to buy a better product, a better made product, but this is all in kind of perception. But I just read today, actually, Women's Wear Daily says that retail is down. Retail is only up 4%, but small independent retailers are up 19%. So there's a place for this connection with garments, and I don't think it has to be at the rate of consumption that we're doing it. Right now, we're buying 68 pieces of clothing per year. Okay, but if we don't have that much money, then how about we buy 4? And we buy 4 really good pieces. And next year we buy 4 more really good pieces, and then they'll last, so I think that there's just a different kind of way to think about it, and the cheap solution is not the answer.
I actually got a follow-up to that.
Can you speak into the mic?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, just to add to your point, Professor, there are small businesses and coalitions out there that are aware of these price hikes that you speak of. The reason I know that because I have a business myself, and we're part of Artisan Fleas in Chelsea Market and in Brooklyn, and Artisan Fleas is big on that. So they try to come up with have businesses within their vendors markets that are at a fair price, and they also, and there are other companies out there like that. So that whole, how should I put it, different side of the world, I guess, is aware of those price hikes, and at the same time we still try to give quality to consumers because like you said, most people on a $40,000 salary is not going to be able to buy at these prices between 30 or better for that matter for just like she said, a t-shirt or a bar of soap even. So I sell soap, that's why I said that. So but there are companies out there that are actually aware of that, and we're trying to do something about it.
All right. Now, thank you, Professor. You've opened up the gates of questions.
Hi, my name is Michelle. Just thank you again for speaking to us today and taking your time to do that. My question goes towards your comment about the culture, just kind of like this over-consuming culture that we have in America where we don't have the awareness of all the things that you were discussing about the true cost of like the clothes we buy and even the food. We don't understand where all of that stuff is coming from and how it really affects us. So do you think that there is, I mean, I'm sure like there's always hope, but how do you think that we can get to a point where our consumers are aware, because we all have a different kind of responsibility, whether it's, you know, the corporations that we talk about in Professor Welt's class or us as consumers? How do we get to a place where everyone is wanting to be aware?
It's a really good question, and I think kind of, and it maybe goes back to Professor Jimenez's point as well about these big brands. Like, I think we have to recognize that Maslow has, like, there's a hierarchy of needs for a reason, and so we just need clothes. We don't need good clothes. We don't need ethical clothes. We just need clothes. And so I think there's a stage where once we kind of get above that, and once we kind of have fed ourselves and clothed ourselves, then we can make those choices. And so we need to recognize that everybody has different things. Like, this is a hard city to live in. It's one of the most expensive cities I've ever lived in my life. So, like, we need to kind of recognize that it's a struggle to kind of get through the day sometimes in this city. But to the gentleman's point, like, there are options. I'm a member of a food co-op, so I get organic food, but it's super cheap because, you know, there's no heat in my co-op, and so I have to wear sweaters when I work there, which I do because I get cheaper prices because I work there. And like, so I think that there's a subculture of opportunity, especially in this city, of people who like clothing swaps. There's a whole bunch of kind of other ways to get involved in trying to break out of this consumeristic viewpoint. And I think that we just get tired. I think that in the same way that you don't get nourished from fast food, like you'll buy it and you'll eat it, but you don't feel good after it. And I think we're getting to that stage with the other products that we purchase. Like, it just doesn't feel good to spend our money, our hardworking money, on something that's going to not last one or two washes. So I think we're evolving to that stage anyway. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Hello, my name is Aisha, and I wanted to know how you feel about genetically modified seed and the firms that produce them, such as Monsanto, and the monopoly they have on the agricultural industry, and how it affects farmers, particularly those in underdeveloped or developing countries.
Well, you guys are really putting me to the test. So I think I feel about genetically modified seed the way I feel about a lot of things. I think that the examples, and I cite this in my book, of the suicide belt in India, I think the case study of genetically modified seed and the way that it was marketed to farmers who didn't understand that this was kind of a financial investment that was maybe not going to benefit them is deplorable. And so I'm really not a fan of the fact that it's still there, the fact that I think the rate of suicide has been something like 250,000 farmers drinking pesticides, mostly because it's the only thing that they have available to kind of alleviate themselves from the financial burden. So I think that the premise of genetically modified started off good. I think that, you know, when it was created, it kind of had best interests at heart. But I think, like a lot of things, it's got business at heart now, and I don't think that it's necessarily a great thing, and particularly in India. So I think if Texas farmers want to use genetically modified seed and you all pay the Texas farmers to use that seed, then that's your choice. Like, cotton has a whole bunch of issues, particularly around subsidies and particularly around, like, as taxpayers, we should be able to decide kind of how we run that. And I think that that should be the same in the countries that are using the seed. But that's not, unfortunately, the case. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Joey. My question is, how can you, for big companies, how can you be economically sustainable, and what's the benefit of like using?
So my question is about the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. There's been a lot of news about it lately in the media. And I'm just wondering, as I understand it, could have a huge boost on the American economy, but at the same time, it will also mean a lot of implications on sustainability development. And my question is, how will this affect ethical fashion and sustainability within the fashion industry?
I have to be honest, I'm not really a fan of trade agreements. And I think that the focus on benefiting the economy focuses only on one aspect of the economy. So I wish that there was just a different way to look at it. I wish that you had kind of advantages for sustainable textiles and the trade of sustainable textiles versus non-sustainable textiles. Like, I think that there's a lot of different ways that this could have been crafted. And so I don't necessarily think that it's going to be advantageous to ethical fashion and to, like, small country producers at all.
Hi, I just had a question on what you think, how the luxury sector can change, like, to be more sustainable. Like, what do you, like, think? Because, like, with fast fashion, like, obviously they're creating so many garments and, like, for so many seasons, but luxury is a little bit more limited. How do you think they'll, like, be a part of this movement?
That's a fantastic question. And actually, you're the first person who's ever asked me that. So it's a whole chapter in my book. And I think that, again, because I really think that consumers are not necessarily eyes wide open in this industry, I think luxury is ready for a big jolt. Because I think heritage brands and heritage labels are not offering consumers what they think they're offering. So I think when consumers realize that a lot of production has been outsourced and that it has the same kind of production value as fast fashion, that they're going to be really questioning how much money they're spending on a label. And so I think that when we talk about luxury, what we're talking about is like handcrafted and all of these kind of things that are starting to really come out of endangered craft communities and crafting communities. So I think that our idea about lace makers in Italy and leather workers in Italy, that's going to shift. And the new luxury is going to be Kenyan beaters and Javanese batik makers. And so really that's going to, the brands that we rely on now to give our high-end money to are not going to be the brands of the future unless they change really quickly. So I think Kering is working on the EP&L because Kering realizes that consumers know that there's kind of this hollow middle between what they're paying for and what they're getting compared to some other brands that are bringing artisanal crafts right to market. So we're kind of in a flux right now, and I think that consumers should really pay attention to that. And I think when we talk about it bags, that we should not be talking about heritage labels. We should be talking about bags that actually do something. You know, like Lauren Bush and her whole feed line, right? You buy a feed bag, and you're actually feeding people in communities around the world. So I think it bags can have another kind of meaning.
Well, this is actually our last paper that we have to write about. But yeah, like, I know I actually have a bag. They're in New York based, Angela Roy. Like, each bag has a specific color and it goes to a specific organization, and it's actually a reasonable price, and I actually like that better. Like, of course, like, a dream would be to have an it bag, but do you think, because like you don't really know, like, we're starting to know about like that, like, you know, things are being outsourced and they're not made in Italy, like what's going to make like them change? What do you think?
Are you asking about luxury brands? What's going to make luxury brands go back to being like atelier driven? It depends. I don't think luxury consumers really recognize right now that they're not getting the handcrafted value that they think they are. So I think luxury is in the kind of sleeping period. So if they can clean up their act and get back to providing that kind of high level craftsmanship before the consumer wakes up. But you can see it, Michael Kors is dropping. Right, like brands are dropping value quickly, and so this has nothing to do with like who the designer is, and this has nothing to do with the marketing of the designer. This probably, in my belief, has to do with the product, and the fact that consumers are just kind of realizing like why and. Like a lot of people, like Financial Times, I quote this in my book. Financial Times, one of the fashion writers, writes about a Yves Saint Laurent dress that she buys. I can't remember, $1,300, $1,400. It's not even lined. So a luxury consumer starts to realize, like, what are you giving me? Why are you not lining a $1,400 dress? Like, that's a fast fashion tactic to save money. So consumers are starting to really kind of recognize this, and I think this creates a great opportunity for artisanal brands who have like really great craftsmanship to kind of take over the market. And once you lose a luxury customer, you're probably not going to get them back, is my opinion.
Well, we're just waiting for these books. I think they should be here any minute. I'll throw one more out there. Okay, we have our friend in the back has another question.
Yes, I just lost my. Oh, I got it back. Sorry. Do you think millennials could play a big role in the future of what's going on now with eco fashion? 'Cause
Yeah.
that's where like I see like the biggest change amongst us as human beings. I think, and this is worldwide I'm talking about, just not just in the United States. I really think channeling millennials will probably spark a lot more change than trying to convince, like, let's say a Versace even, and their old-time consumer to have a new way of thinking. So I wanted to know just your thoughts on that alone.
Well, I don't think millennials need to be marketed to. I think like Globe
Not
Scan-
necessarily marketed to, sorry, but more so just getting the message out there, so to speak. That I
Okay.
think they would have a strong voice
They
in the
do?
change.
So GlobeScan and BBMG do this annual global study called the Aspirationals, and 65% of millennials will go out of their way to buy a product that resonates with them on a social or an environmental aspect. So they're already they're already the change makers in this industry and in this kind of in this sector. They don't have a lot of money, but research also shows that they dictate what their parents buy, right? So that hasn't really changed. Millennials always make their parents buy cooler stuff and, get the best brands. And so you get to hit two kind of generations with millennials. But I don't think luxury and I don't think fashion is dictating millennials. I think because you're the digital era, like you're digital natives, you just grew up with a different kind of perspective. I think you're going to dictate the industry. And I really hope that ethical fashion is part of it. Like I think it is. I think you want things that are made exclusively or made uniquely and handcrafted well and have some sort of meaning outside of a label and a brand and an ad campaign. So I think the future is really bright for what millennials are going to kind of shift their attention to and where they're going to spend their money.
Thanks.
Thanks for the question.
What do you think of Tom's shoes? It's a topic of debate in some of the classes as a case study. You're probably aware that there are very strong proponents, but also detractors that claim, it depresses local industry and the shoes fall apart and go in the landfill really quickly, and then some girls say that they're very ugly because they have a crease in the front. And so what do you think of Tom's shoes?
So I like the concept that when you buy something that there is something happening with your dollar. This kind of goes back to my overall premise about value. Like I think that's what we're looking for when we're buying something. And I think that the business model of Tom's with this convenience of I buy one, I give one was maybe a little too simplistic for the overarching business models and the infrastructure in some countries. So I think the idea in its genesis was probably really valid and really good, but I think that we've kind of all discovered that is not necessarily the best plan.
But that doesn't stop social enterprise as a concept and social enterprise as a concept in this sector. Like there's now tons of fashion brands and tons of, like Warby Parker is a really good example. So Warby Parker, I think, learned from Tom's how to do it right. So I'm not going to buy one, give one. I'm going to buy one and give to the charity or to the NGO on the ground and have them disperse, you know, this added value. So I think that there's a lot of ways that we've taken this idea and learned from it. Feed is another example. Lauren Bush, like she'll take the money, she'll give it to the WHO or to a feeding UNICEF, another feeding organization, and give them the money and let them kind of parse it out. So I think it's par for the course, and I think we're looking for something extra when we buy something, whether it's we've saved the planet, whether it's we've supported fair trade, whether it's, you know, we've bought something and we've given something with the gift. Okay, now the books are here.
Okay, wonderful. So at this point, I think the main thing we all have to do is give a big hand to the wonderful guest speakers.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the great questions.